Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the fact that ketogenic diets are not high protein diets. And I'm actually saying this as someone who is against ketogenic diets. I generally oppose them. However, I have used them in the past. I'm very well educated on them. And a lot of people will say, well, you just don't know enough about it. Really, I've read almost everything that everyone from Dr. Jeff Volek to Dr. Adkins has written on them. I'm pretty well educated on the topic. I still think they're garbage. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. But, we get into this topic here, and I mentioned that in a video the other day again, that most of the data out there, and people say, why don't you link the studies? Because if you guys really follow ketogenic diets and you haven't read any of the metabolic ward studies comparing high fat versus high carb diets and different things to see how much muscle people lose, if you haven't bothered to read those metabolic ward studies and find all of them yourself and you go follow this silly ass diet, you kind of deserve what's coming to you. All right, if you claim that you're well read, then you have read all these studies, including the metabolic ward stuff. So that's kind of my point there. But the thing we get into, someone had said, couldn't you just eat enough protein on a ketogenic diet to retain muscle mass better? No, that's not a ketogenic diet. And that's the take home that you have to remember. And every single person who even writes for these keto things has to remind people that it's like a ketogenic diet is not a low carb diet. A high protein, low carbohydrate diet is a high protein, low carbohydrate diet. It is not a ketogenic diet. All right, and that's what the pro-keto people who understand what the diet is say, and I'm saying the same thing as an anti-keto person. A ketogenic diet is generally 80% fat. All right, that is a standard ketogenic diet as developed by the medical community to treat specific medical conditions that has been named the ketogenic diet. Now, you can call anything you want. You can call a cat a dog. You can call an apple an orange. You can call a high-protein diet a ketogenic diet if you want, but you're not using the correct terms, and that is not a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diets are, worst case, maybe 70% fat, and that's really pushing it. You start talking about 30% calories from protein, and you're probably not going to stay in a state of ketosis. You're going to kick yourself back out of ketosis. You're going to go pee on those keto strips. They're not going to come back purple. You're not going to be in ketosis. When you start eating 300 grams of protein a day, you're no longer in ketosis. That's not a ketogenic diet. A ketogenic diet by its very nature is ultra high fat, extremely low carbohydrate, and moderate protein. Moderate protein, which is why they suck for people who are holding a lot of muscle who want to retain their muscle when in a caloric deficit, because calorie per calorie, fat is the least muscle sparing macronutrient. Carbohydrates are the next best one, and then protein is superior. So generally speaking, when you bring carbohydrates down, you need to bring protein up. Because carbohydrates are protein sparing, they're muscle sparing. They're not as good as protein is at it. But if someone were to come to me and say, well, I follow a clean, high protein keto diet. I'm like, well, what'd you eat today? They're like, I don't know, I had 2 pounds of chicken breast, 3 protein shakes, a bunch of almond and cashew butter, and spinach leaves. And I'm like, that's not a ketogenic diet. You had like 300 grams of protein. Now, would I look at your diet and say that you could probably preserve muscle pretty good on that? Yeah, most likely. That actually doesn't sound too bad for someone who lifts. To be fair, you can reduce carbohydrates quite a bit. You can take carbohydrates to nearly zero and maintain muscle just fine as long as you elevate protein. Because number one, you need the protein for gluconeogenesis. Let me get the term correct. So that you can create glucose out of it, so that you have training fuel, because weight training is fueled by glucose. You have all the extra protein you need for retaining muscle tissue. You're good to go. You just have a preference towards fat. You feel more full on fat. You feel better satiety on more fat than more carbs. Okay, that's fine. But again, carbohydrates are our training fuel. Carbohydrates are the fuel of intense athletic performance. They are the fuel of resistance training and weight training. That is what you are burning when you do a squat or a deadlift. You are burning pure carbs, not fat. You're not burning ketone bodies for that. So when we get into that, I'd be like, well, you'll be okay if you eat enough protein. but you're not going to be in ketosis. And I would argue that that would be superior. Like, I'm not against people reducing carbohydrates if they feel the need to reduce carbs to lose body fat, particularly if they're replacing a lot of those carbs with protein. Like, for example, let's say, I don't know, right now you ate a diet that was 40% fat, 40% carbs, and 20% protein, and you're at maintenance right now, and you're maintaining your muscle and strength just fine on that. And then you say, hey, I want to drop my carbs down and replace it with protein. If you're at maintenance, let's say your maintenance is 3,000 calories, and that's what you're following, and then you suddenly take that out of your 40% carbohydrates, you take 30% of it and turn it into protein, right? So now, when you start looking at the thermic effect of that, you start looking at the protein sparing effect of that, even on the exact same calories, what would happen? What would happen? If you're at maintenance right now, you'll start losing body weight, because the thermic effect of the protein alone will put you into a caloric deficit at that point. And it's going to be muscle sparing, which is what we want for a lifter. It's what we want. And it's going to be appetite suppressing. You're actually going to have better satiety most likely on that, because you just replaced 30%. Let's say it's at 3,000 calories. Well, 30% of 3,000 calories, we're talking about like 900 calories of extra protein has been added in. Carbs have been swapped out for protein at that point. That's going to be very satiating. I mean, you're probably eating 3 pounds of chicken every day at that point, quite possibly. Because we're talking about 50% protein calories. You're getting near 400 grams. That would work just fine. You know what? You're getting plenty of essential fatty acids. You're not going to be deficient in any of your fat-soluble vitamins. You're not going to have any problems there. That would be perfectly acceptable. I would look at that and say, okay, you're 40% fat now, 10% carbs, 50% protein. Yeah, that's fine. If someone did that and that's their preference because they just feel better eating a bit more fat, they feel better on 40% fat. They feel better satiety, fuller. They don't develop muscle dietary imbalances that way. I would look at that and say that's perfectly fine for fat loss. That's going to be slower fat loss because you've kept your calories the same, your intake the same, but you're getting a net increase in output. You probably have put yourself into about a 300 calorie deficit every day. Just ballpark based on the thermic effect of the protein, that would be fine. But if you were to take that same thing and you were to replace those carbohydrates with fat, you've lost the small amount of thermic effect you just got from the carbohydrates. You might actually start gaining a tiny little bit of body fat. Your performance is going to go down because you're going to have less glycogen to train on because you've replaced your carbs. You didn't increase your protein. You've replaced your carbs with fat. Well, you're pretty much getting into a ketogenic diet at that point. If you were to take the same numbers and shift to that, I would predict you're going to struggle to maintain muscle. You're going to struggle to perform, and you're probably not even going to lose any body fat. So when we look at like a baseline and we shift it in those directions, no, that doesn't make sense. It's stupid. It's stupid. Like, you shouldn't be going, I want to replace my protein with saturated fat, and honestly think that that's going to preserve muscle tissue. That's absurd. The scientific literature doesn't support it. We know that protein overfeeding preserves muscle mass the best. Consuming very large amounts of protein when you're in a caloric deficit allows for more rapid fat loss while retaining muscle better. All right, so when we start talking about true ketogenic diets, you're talking about 20%, 25%, 15% of your calories from protein. All right, that's starting to get pretty low, and then you have to create a caloric deficit on top of it. You don't lose weight on a ketogenic diet without a caloric deficit, and that's been proven repeatedly. You don't lose body fat. So it's not going to work the way that people think it is. That's why I don't promote these diets. This isn't healthy. It's not good for your muscle tissue. But I'm not saying reducing carbohydrates is always bad. I mean, if you feel better on a little more fat and replacing most of your carbs with protein when you cut, and you can follow that successfully as a meal plan, I think that'll work just fine. It depends upon the individual. Some people function better on more carbs versus more fat when they're cutting in terms of their mood, particularly their satiety. That's okay, but the worst thing you can possibly do is not increase protein intake when you are trying to cut or reduce body fat, because you're going to lose more muscle tissue, you're going to perform worse, and your appetite is not going to be controlled as well. So my issue is not with low carbohydrate diets. My issue is with replacing protein with saturated fat. I mean, that is just stupid, and that is what a ketogenic diet is. And in every single study that looks at it, ketogenic diets have the worst muscle retention of any sort of commonly used diet. And it's because they don't have enough protein. Higher protein diets dominate for changes in body composition. They do. This isn't even a point of contention anymore in the nutritional science literature. It's not. So ketogenic diets are not high protein diets. And so when someone says, well, I want to do a high protein diet, then I want to do keto, well, you can't do both. Ketogenic diets are really kind of stupid for people who want to retain muscle. Higher protein dominates. It doesn't mean you can't reduce carbs. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.